Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hello/X/, I am freaking out a bit and want you guys to tell me I'm not the only one who has seen this. Be me. Doing a long hike in the Ozarks, 3 days and 2 nights mostly, to practice for a big Colorado hike with buddies in a few weeks. Route is a little scuffed. Montana has beautiful forests, but not the greatest support for them. Started bright in early day 1. Was worried about tweakers at first because Ozarks, but too far from any real towns for them to hole up in. Bright and hot all day. No problems that day or night. Day 2. Fine up until early afternoon when I stopped for lunch at the base of a hill. Tearing into some jacklinks when I started to hear footsteps up the hill behind me. Turn around and see nothing. Middle of the day and the forest is thin, so nothing could really hide from me. Footsteps keep crunching leaves on the ground down the hill. Stuff jerky in a pack and book it down the trail. Figured it was a small animal bouncing around without me seeing it. Try to push away paranoid thoughts about a very lost mountain lion or equally spooky meth head as I continue the hike. Set up camp for night 2 just before sunset in a clearing at the top of a hill. In the middle of building a fire when I hear loud footsteps coming up the hill. Look down, see nothing. The sun is still up, so I should be able to see whatever it is. Keep staring in the direction of the sounds until the setting sun catches just right on it. A shimmering shape of a person walking into the clearing. Looks like how people go invisible in movies like in The Predator. Refracting light around the body. It stopped a few steps later and knew I could see it because it waved at me. I raised a hand back in acknowledgement because I'm an idiot and would die first in a horror movie. But it just turned around and walked back into the forest. Nothing else happened for the rest of the trip. What the hell was that? Has anyone else seen an invisible man? Or have I been the tweaker all along?
Invisible humanoids. I couldn't really find an image appropriate, but I'll explain. Several months ago, just before winter, I saw what would appear to be a silhouette. Details. It was humanoid in shape, I'm certain. It was no larger or smaller than a normal person. No weird proportions. That I could see. Nothing weird like protrusions or features that I could see. Best way I can explain. The air is full of little particles and such moving around all the time. You never notice these things because it's everywhere. Imagine a lack of those dust particles haze in a human-shaped spot. Not like the Predator, but the spot is only slightly off and different from everything around it. It took me a moment to adjust my eyes to it and make out the shape. I genuinely thought it was fluid in my eyes making a distortion. Its appearance. It moves like a human normally, as I could tell. I've seen it in both light and dark, seen in and around my neighborhood and shops close by, always lurking near some concealment, shrub, tree line, building, fence corner. You can hear it moving, just like a person moving would make sounds. It's not ethereal or anything. I'm not going to claim and be a believer or a skeptic, but I've seen it enough times to know it's not normal. Not only that, but other people have noticed it without me pointing it out to them. I had my eyesight checked. Note, on one occasion when I did physically point to it, it simply ceased to be. It didn't leave, it didn't hide, it was just despawned. A lady and their husband were running with their dog and saw it when their dog went bonkers. Once again, I caught a glimpse, but it likewise vanished a second later. I've taken pictures. It looks like pictures of the neighborhood because the silhouette isn't visible enough to register on a camera. I could speculate, but I don't have the slightest clue what it could be. Nothing bad has happened near here. Nothing else weird is going on as far as I know. Any ideas, thoughts? To explain a few further things, because I was asked this by other people I spoke to, the closest it has ever been to me was in the backyard around the side of the shed at night. I noticed it when I was wearing headphones and smoking. My music stopped, and I heard a sound, saw it, and started turning on outdoor lights, and it was gone. I can't tell what it's doing, other than lurking. When it moves, it doesn't move very much. Usually, if it walks more than a few feet, it's gone. Once it's noticed, it tends to be more still, but it doesn't remain visible for long after. Usually, it will remain visible for a bit unless I move toward it or stop when I see it. Then it basically vanishes within a few seconds. When it vanishes, you don't hear it anymore. Apparently, dogs will bark at it, at least once. Don't know of any ghost stories or legends, relatively newer neighborhood. Never heard it talk, just heard it shuffle and move vegetation.
Have you acknowledged its presence in any way?
Yes, I have. I suppose at least in the following ways. I have pointed it out to someone. I stopped abruptly with a startle when walking after seeing it, turning on the lights after seeing it in my backyard, looking directly at it and focusing on it. Every time the result is the same. Very little movement and it disappears in a few seconds. If I walk and don't directly face it and make it obvious it has my attention, it stays unless I get closer.
It could legitimately be the military testing out advanced camouflage.
I mean, that's entirely possible. It's also really cool, to be honest. If that's the case, then I'd prefer if they didn't do this in my backyard, but I also wholeheartedly encourage them to play pranks on people. Note, it didn't look like someone wearing combat armor or anything. Not nearly bulky and big enough.
My friends and I saw an invisible man twice when we were kids. We would spend most of our time after school in the creek behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood, catching tadpoles, crawdads, snakes, etc. This was before the water got polluted and shined like oil by a construction company upstream, so we had a lot to catch. Anyways, my brother and I were using chalk to write the newest bad words we discovered on the entrance of a storm drain that would drain water from one part of the neighborhood straight to the creek if it started to flood. We heard footsteps coming from the other side of the drain and looked to see if it was one of our friends who always came from there since his house was next to the entrance. Nothing was there, and we could easily see across to the other side, but the steps kept coming. We watched as the steps left the drain and went straight into the creek, leaving pockets of air like legs in the water as they crossed to the other side. We told our friends later that we saw a ghost while scooping a net through the water for tadpoles. They didn't believe us, so we went back to the storm drain to show them where it was. We looked around for a bit until one of my friends shouted and pointed upstream, where the shape of a man was shimmering like the one in your story. It walked off and we ran away screaming about the ghost. Never saw it again. There's definitely some kind of invisible entities out there. Could be interdimensional, aliens, or actual spirits, but that's beyond me.
Some backstory first. 2014. Living in a share house with some friends. And one other guy named Michael. Michael's about 60 and had been living in the spare room before most of us moved in. He's deaf and stayed in his room most of the time, only really coming out to visit his family or when the rest of us are asleep. Seems chill and we never really saw him, so we tend to forget he even lived with us. One night I had a scary, vivid nightmare. There's some kind of pissed-off invisible entity trashing one of the other rooms. I confront it and tell it to take its shit somewhere else. It's not too stoked on the idea. The ceiling turns black. My spine bends backwards. I'm completely paralyzed. I'm slowly pulled up into the ceiling. I can feel something taking over my body. I scream out in pain, but the voice that comes out isn't my own. I wake up as soon as I touch the ceiling. The next morning, one of my housemates approached me. Anon, I had a terrible dream. There was a demon in the house and it took Michael. He killed us all. Kinda spooked, but threw it up to coincidence. A week later, all of us except Michael skipped town for the weekend to go to a concert. Another week later, a car pulls up outside. It's Michael's son coming to pick up his stuff. While we were gone, Michael had a stroke and died in hospital. Flash forward a couple of years, rapidly deteriorating mental health, blacking out and waking up with deep cuts all over my body, dissociative episodes lasting weeks at a time, where I'm pretty much on autopilot with poor memory of what's happened. During one of these episodes, I got a full torso tattoo of the skull of Baphomet and the Leviathan cross. The blackouts stop. I do have a family history of mental health issues, though. Should I keep seeing shrinks and doctors, or should I talk to an exorcist? I've already accepted that I'm a crazy person, and I'm probably just trying to find something to pin my crazy on, but I don't really have anything to lose by looking more into the occult, right?
Touched by an invisible entity. Let me begin by apologizing for my messy storytelling. I'll share my story, and then I've got a question at the end. When I was circa 12 years old, I was living with my mother and sister in an apartment in a decently sized town. I don't have much to say other than that we've experienced quite a bit of paranormal activity everywhere we've lived. But since my parents separated, it has increased. And it's during this period we lived in this apartment that we experienced the most serious activity. Things like cupboards slamming open and shut, and a radio that didn't turn off even with everything unplugged. And finally, an experience I'll never forget since it happened to me alone. Basically, I was staying up late one night and making noise from my phone while in bed. I quickly turned everything off when I heard footsteps approaching my door, thinking it was my mom, and waited for them to finally reach me and stop. But to my surprise, the footsteps kept coming and entered my room until they were somewhere around the foot of my bed. Instinctively, I pulled my feet under the covers, and just then, I felt something like a pair of hands pushing down on my feet and grabbing them for a couple seconds until they let go. Naturally, I yelled, and my mother came rushing in, wondering what the fuss was about, and I explained what happened, and she convinced me it was probably the spirit of a dead relative. A prankster, but very kind man. Just making himself known. This is the only story I've heard of anyone I know being actually touched by someone invisible. Have any of you experienced anything similar or have any thoughts on this experience of mine?
My second deployment to Iraq. We were doing a nighttime small kill team SKT ambush in a house we took over while overwatching an intersection commonly planted with improvised explosive device, IED, trying to kill the idiots who emplaced them. Dawn was coming up. We were just ready to pack up and call the Quick Reaction Force, QRF platoon, to drive up and pick us up when we spotted a lone dude carrying an artillery round. It was too bright for any night vision, still a bit dark for eyes, but we positively ID'd as a hostile threat. And I had my sniper with an M110 kill him. One shot, only about 175 meters, easy shot. Upper chest, I was on glass and saw a bullet impact. I watched him crumple and drop in the grass on the side of the road. He was a skinny dude wearing a tight athletic shirt. He didn't have body armor to stop 7.62 NATO at that range. I called Quick Reaction Force to pick us up and reported to the command. Command orders us to search for the kill. As they were driving up, my SKT team, an infantry fire team plus a sniper team, left the house to check the body for intel, because we had to bag them and drop them off at the local Iraqi police station if possible. But there was no body. What the hell? We walked around for like 20 minutes, ever-enlarging circles. Not a single piece of evidence he was there. No body, no blood, no crawl marks, no IED, no nothing. We looked like idiots because I'd reported the shot on the company network and no body. Caught an endless amount of shit about it. But weird shit happens in war. A few years later, I ran into a dude who served in the unit we relieved in place. They left. We took over the area of operations. We were at a bar, putting drinks away and trading war stories about the neighborhoods and shit. Then I brought up that area and we dropped the Invisible Man, what I came to call him. I didn't tell the story, I just mentioned the frequency of IEDs at that intersection area. Then he tells a story about an SKT who killed an IED emplacer but didn't find the body. No fucking way! Now he wasn't there, but it was another platoon in his company whose squad was out and reported they'd smoked the guy. So he knew part of their story. He didn't have a description of appearance, but in his version, many dudes had opened on the emplacer, a few M4S, a M249, and a M240, and they were so sure they got him. No way someone survived that barrage. They dumped nearly 100 rounds at one dude. What are the chances of two dudes with lousy luck who have been mortally wounded in the same place a year apart? Shot but not killed instantly. Shock hits them, no pain. Clothes absorb the blood. The low crawl away to some dead space we can't see. Where they get up, make it a few blocks before dying. Just a coincidence. No evidence was found, no IED, etc. That has to be it. Otherwise, was it a ghost? Did we all hallucinate? Sometimes I can't sleep because of the invisible man. If that was a ghost, then there is an afterlife. What happens to me when I go? Will the invisible man be waiting for me?
What is wrong with my perspective? Hi/X/. I am in need of assistance and/or advice because I am currently in a crisis concerning my relationship with the paranormal, and it's not what you think. Let me give you some context first. I am firmly religious and fervent in my daily practice. I come from North Africa where, despite the deeply rooted Arabic and European influence, we still keep our inherently tribalistic and ancestral beliefs and cultures to our heart. My family has made frequent and troublesome encounters with what lies beyond our perception. My aunt has been the subject of possession by a jinn. My uncle emigrated to Spain by smuggling himself into a cargo container using the advice of an old hermit he saw one day. My great-uncle is a dowser and has found a source of water that became a well, which was a boon to our comfort in the years where the government cut the water 5 out of 7 days. My mother has found in herself divination capacities and has trained in sensing and sharing energy, for which she is a professional now. My brother and one of my cousins loved trekking in the wilderness, but came across an invisible entity, which, while not outright hostile, was clearly abnormal enough to make them flee. It took shape in the sand and became visibly humanoid. It was later identified as a jinn. We got a ton of those here. The PhD student I work with also has stories. While they come from Taiwan, and we are both persons of science, their stories are too detailed and came with enough proof that I couldn't reject them outright. They had a few problematic encounters with the paranormal population of Taiwan, as their family is apparently also extremely sensitive and attuned to the invisible world. So much so, in fact, that they have a kind of contamination effect, where the paranormal seeps into the people they are close to and encounters them. For most people, the time of danger is night, but for my culture at least, it's in the twilight and the dawn that the risks happen. I disobeyed often to try and see what the heck it was all about, with a ton of chancla beating happening due to the horrible risks I took. It, however, quickly died down when my family and myself made a rather weird observation when I was about 15. I'm kinda safe to be around, and being around me always gives the most predictable, statistically correct outcome. I cited those stories before because I was a component in most of these, a detail that made them even weirder. When my aunt was possessed, each time I was in the same room as her to try and help out with the exorcism, and just making sure she didn't hurt herself. The symptoms stopped or regressed severely. Whenever I was in proximity of my dowser uncle, his power just stopped. I interrupted his search many times before we both understood my presence was the problem. My mother, who's fairly accurate, can't get a good reading on me and says that I feel empty and just. Since I do not cite things in order, I was already saying, yeah, okay, cool, I guess. Nothing new under the sun after all. My brother and cousins weren't able to take me back to the entity to see it again. It simply didn't manifest. While it may have been something of a timing issue there, I was beginning to doubt it. This same PhD student didn't have any encounter, even though it was their daily life before, when I came to work in the lab, which didn't shake them, just saying to me that I'm super lucky. Well, I don't feel lucky. I feel cut off. And it's like I'm a repellent to anything abnormal. I explored a few most haunted spots of the country without doing anything but cardio and dodging some cops and army men. I want to have this in my life too. I want to have stories to share. But no, for whatever the reason the paranormal exists, and I have been surrounded by it. But I can't access it, or maybe the reverse. Screw that. I want to know what I am. It's making me paranoiac.
Before I start with the story, I just want to say that until this incident, I was a skeptic just like the rest of my family. This happened when I was 9 and we moved into a 3-bedroom apartment. I got the smallest room because I was the youngest. It started on the very first night of moving in. When we went to bed, I was excited to sleep in my new room. I had only lain in my bed for about a minute when I started hearing a scraping noise which seemed to be coming from near the door. The best I can describe it is that it sounded like someone scraping their bare feet against the carpet. I was freaked out, so I sat up and looked over to where it seemed to be coming from, but nothing was there. It had stopped. I lay back down and dismissed it as my imagination, but almost immediately it started to happen again. This time I didn't bother, as I convinced myself it must just be my parents, who were still awake, sorting out the bags. The next night, the exact same thing happened, and I noticed that when I looked over, it would stop, but as soon I would lie back down, it would continue. Every night this happened until it became a regular thing. I told my parents, but they just laughed and told me that it's probably the pipes or something, which I found hard to believe. Next, I started getting the feeling of being watched, mostly at night. Then we kept having power fluctuations, as well as other weird things like the TV turning on and off randomly. Another creepy thing that happened about once a month was that someone would knock at the door when corridor lights would be off, and you could see someone's feet at the bottom of the door for a while, until it would just stop. This all went on for about 6 months. By now, I was 10. Until one night I was really tired, and I was constantly being disturbed by the scraping noise. I got so fed up that I mustered up enough courage to say, "Just stop," aloud. Unexpectedly, it actually stopped. At that time, I was just grateful and went to sleep. When I woke up, the more I thought about it, the more creeped out I was because of the fact that there must have been something as it did what I said. After that, all the creepy things that I mentioned in the second paragraph stopped. I'm now 19, and I haven't experienced anything weird since, but I do still believe in ghosts.
I was living in a travel trailer for a time on my sister's property, about 3 acres or so, circa the summer of 2019. The house was in the front on half the property, and I was in the wildlands backfield behind the backyard. This was near Redding, California, and the Sacramento River, only several blocks away, basically in the country and county outside of town, but quite a few residences up and down the streets around the area on big lots. I don't remember what made me open the door and stick my head out to look around one late evening, but something caused me to do it. Maybe some noise. As I was looking around, I heard what sounded like several very slow footsteps in dry brush, going crack, snap, crack, like someone was walking away slowly, kind of being stealthy. I then realized it was right there, about 15 feet away, maybe on this side of the see-through wire fence, but it could have been right on the other side of the neighbor's property back section. So I was looking, waiting to see some animal wildlife or something, but there was nothing. It was dark, but I had my outside trailer light on and there was some good moonlight. If there was something there, I should have been able to see it. Then I heard someone run off into the backfield. It had to be a very large, if not huge, heavy animal, like a horse. It was bump, 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 bump. I was surprised it didn't shake the ground or trailer, but not a 4-legged horse-like clippity-clop. It was an obvious 2-legged run, probably with a very long stride. And then it was gone. But I saw nothing, like it was invisible. I went back in and locked my door, and nothing else happened. I looked around the next day for some footprints, but didn't find any. I can only think that it must have been a Bigfoot. Is it possible that it was cloaked or invisible?
No green text, and sorry for the grammar. I'm not a native English speaker. As a child, between 10 to 12, I had an invisible female friend, a friendly blonde girl around 8, 9 years old. Also, I knew that she was not real. We talked and played together. This thing talking without words, only in imagination. I never felt scared. She was like a little sister. She called herself Anna, One day she asked me if I could search for her doll in the basement. Some neighborhood guy had it hidden there. I searched the basement and found a very old doll. I placed the doll in the garden behind the house. Next day, the doll, and the girl, disappeared forever. 5 or 6 years later, I dug a hole in the garden, found debris. Talked about to my old neighbor. He told me that behind his house was formerly also a small house, which was bombed in World War II. A young couple who was living there with her daughter was killed, though the girl's body was never found. I mumbled Anna, and he got a concerned face. We did not talk further about it. 2 years later, another neighbor died. We had to sort his things, and I stumbled over an old photo album. I sat down and looked for old pictures. He was an international traveling salesman before World War II, and found a batch of them, Zanzibar, Shanghai, and other internationals ports around 1930. But later I found a photograph of a small house with a small family, dated 1943, and the girl in the picture was my imaginary friend.
It was 1999 and I just flew to Colombia. I stay with 8 or 9 friends in Medellin at an old hostel ran by an elderly British expat. We were given the last room during the busy season. During my few weeks there, I suffered from a malaria fever very badly, so all day and night I stayed in the room alone, while the rest of the guys went out every night to have fun. And the fever makes me very weak as I am not able to get up from bed and no medicine is working. All the other guys returned back the following mornings. All day I was sleeping in the room. After 15 days around midnight, someone punched me very hard on my back when I was sleeping. For a moment I was not able to turn back and see. It was like an electric flow in my entire body. I thought it was due to the fever. I felt this and forgot. Again, the next day at the same time, someone slapped me very hard when I was sleeping. This time I realized that there was something invisible with me in this room, and I stopped staying in that room at night. Believe me, after a few days my fever went away, but I was out of vacation days. I discussed the story with my few friends, but none take it seriously, and I myself never try to investigate the room. The Brit showed me the footage of the camera in the hallway that no one entered the room at the time I was assaulted. I concluded that I must have offended some entity with my intentions for the trip.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.